Welcome to Buy Mi Casa podcast. This podcast is an informational platform for home buyers. Our goal is to use social media to bring awareness to the public on the home buying process and its resources. And now, your host, David B. Faley. Now it is recording.
You're sure you see?
Yes, it is.
Wow,
I can see the numbers. It was.
Okay.
I was wondering why it was green, and I looked a couple of times. So it looks like we had one heck of a warm-up session.
Yeah.
So I guess we can breeze through this quick.
All right.
So this is episode 1 of Buying Mi Casa. This is the English version, and I have your Mr. John Fisher. And I don't know if I can call you a guru, right?
You don't have to climb a mountain to find me, so probably not.
So share a little bit about your experience. What brought you in, like we just said before? What get you started?
Yeah, what happened, first of all, I've been around for a while. This is probably 40, 50 years ago almost. I moved to this area. I was in New York City, moved here. And we bought a house. And the house had a garage that was connected with it, or not connected with it, but next to it. And my friend wanted a place to live, so we sort of fixed it over for him to live there. He lived there for a while, and then he moved on. And then so we started renting it to somebody else, and that's really how I got into the landlord business. I also was working for a nonprofit up in, at the time, Franklin County, and they wanted to have a little pamphlet on being a landlord, and basically I was the only one in the agency who had done that. So this is before the internet. I went over to the law library and sort of looked up all the stuff and found all the stuff that I should have been doing that I hadn't been doing, and all the ways I could have probably gotten in trouble, but luckily hadn't. And so I wrote a little pamphlet, and it worked out pretty well. So I got some other property along the way and bought and sold it and made some big mistakes sometimes, and also talked to people and found they did big mistakes sometimes, and ended up kind of becoming, in quote, an expert on housing law and landlord-tenant law, although I'm not an attorney. And I wrote a book on how to be a landlord, and it's been in it keeps getting changed because the laws keep getting changed. But anyway, that's how I got into the business.
Like I mentioned, that's an accidental profession.
It is an accidental profession. It has nothing to do with what I did in college.
That's usually happen.
Yeah. Life is what happens to you. And
my daughter spent like about $63,000 in college student loan, and she's working a job not even close related to what she studied.
Right, but it's nice on the wall. You got the diploma.
It looks pretty.
Yeah.
So, fair lending.
Fair lending.
What is fair lending?
Well, fair lending, I think at one point we were talking, I think the best way to describe it is fair lending is what you should have happen to you when you go to get a loan. It's that you should be judged by who you are, and basically whether you are a good candidate for the loans, not where you come from, not the color of your skin, not whether you're gay or straight, not what your sex is, not whether you're a veteran, not whether you come from someplace somebody doesn't like
a national origin.
Yeah, it's just all of these things. You should be taken basically on who you are. And it's just sometimes people ask, well, what's discrimination? Discrimination is whatever somebody does to you because of who you are that has nothing to do with whether you were a good candidate for that loan.
Like I gave an earlier example about me becoming a teller and the books that I read about becoming a teller.
Yes.
And those books that I read about, that's one particular book that I read about teller. It talks about how teller was the image. They were the go-between. They were they know everybody in the community. Mm-hmm. And if someone needed a loan, they needed to speak to the teller. Then it wasn't a loan officer. There wasn't a customer service rep. It was a teller.
Yeah.
And the teller will give you a loan based upon how you present yourself, how you behave yourself, your behavior in the community, or maybe a customer that is a good behavior refer his neighbor, and that's the only way to get a loan. They look at you and say, well, he's too dusty, I don't want him. He looks kind of cranky. So it's not like that. It is actually, now it is about you qualifying.
Yeah, and in some ways, of course, that's good and bad, because if you have a good teller, first of all, by the way, it's good for the bank because that teller knows the right people to lend to, but it's also good for you because you get really treated as yourself.
Preferential treatment.
Yeah, but the downside of it, of course, is it can also be colored by racism, by sexism, by all of these other things, so that But that was the way, that if you had the good teller, the teller who was fair, who was smart, and who knew you, and you got to know them, and if you recommended someone, they would trust your word on it.
Trust your judgment.
Yeah, that was good, except that also you go back at about that same time. We talked about this before, but basically people hear the term redlining, and way back, it's actually very interesting because historically, what happened was the federal government, the FHA, had maps of, there'd be like a map of Springfield or a map of Holyoke, and there would be these red lines where they would draw in certain areas. And basically what the government was saying, what the FHA was saying is that if you we will not back a mortgage if you write it for a person of color in certain neighborhoods.
Certain areas.
Yeah. And those, to some extent, it's interesting because that really went on until about 1962. People are sometimes surprised to know that first of all, it happened in the North, up here.
Yes.
And that it happened
after the Civil War.
Yeah, exactly. And that it happened that recently. I mean, 60 years ago isn't that recent, but people think of it as being
way back.
It's not. And I think the analogy I sometimes used is you see that even today is when you're, sometimes you're driving along a highway and you're just driving along and all of a sudden everything slows down and the traffic just moves very slowly and then it speeds up. And you can't figure what happened. Why did it go slowly? And what happened was maybe an hour ago, there was an accident there and traffic was stopped. And since traffic was heavy, it still tends to slow down. It's like the ghost of that accident.
Still feeling the effect of that accident.
Yeah. And that we still feel the effects in terms of where loans are written, where people are shown, things like that, of that old redlining. So kind of what's happened, I guess the thing is that now supposedly to get around it, there are measures, there's FICO scores, there's histories, there's all of these things that the decision is made on, supposedly, but that doesn't mean it's always made fairly, and you don't, because it's that way, you don't have that wise teller that you were at one time.
I think that, so not that I think, but actually it is that redlining is actually, no, let me reverse that. Discrimination and fair lending is a byproduct, is a result of redlining.
Absolutely.
Because based upon redlining, which is where they can control where they want to write that loan or show the real estate agent to show the prospective borrower that loan, they have to be
happy here. I'm going to show you. Here's a place you'll be happy. Not here.
Because you are part of that, what they call the protective category?
Protected categories. Yeah, there are about 16 of them. They're federal and state. And they are, the obvious one is race. And by the way, it's always good to remind yourself that it has been illegal to discriminate based on race in the United States since 1866.
That's
1866.
It's illegal.
It's illegal. As a matter of fact, the courts bent over backwards to try to figure out how they were going to get around that. You didn't really get enforcement on that until over maybe 100 years later.
So why they institute the law if they're planning to go around it?
Because of the fact that everyone did. They got around it. There was a Supreme Court decision back in 1892, I believe, that talked about where people sit in a train, in the front or the back of the train. And the Supreme Court decided that it was not discriminatory if there was something called separate but equal. And so
separate but equal seating.
Yeah, so then you take the same sort of thing. Well, you can't buy the house here, but you can buy an equivalent house there. So it's not really discrimination. Now, there's a whole lot of, there's, again, a lot of, first of all, it's obviously wrong. But that aside, it took probably up until some court cases in the 40s, 50s. The very famous one is 1954, had to do with education. Brown versus the Board of Education, where, separate schools were not equal. They started to finally go after that. But anyway, race is no exceptions, a protected category. Sex, your national origin, ancestry, whether you are your sex, your
sexual orientation,
sexual orientation, a big one. What's called gender identity and expression, which is another way of kind of looking at the same sort of thing. Also, interestingly enough, veteran status. Thank you for your service, but we're not going to sell to you here. We're not going to give you a loan because
we don't know if you're going to be deployed or you're going to go
somewhere.
You're going to be moving to another state.
Yeah, you're in the reserves. Sure, you're making good money now, but if your unit gets called up, you're going to be back on whatever.
And who's going to pay the mortgage?
Yeah. So those are the protected categories.
Wow, this is getting bigger and bigger.
It is huge.
Like you say, if it walk like a duck and quack like a duck,
it's probably a duck.
Probably a duck.
Yep. And that's actually because it can sometimes be subtle. That's what people really have to understand, how they're treated when they go for that loan. And if they are, again, they have to qualify. Everyone, you need to qualify. You need to do your homework. You need to do your job in terms of being eligible. But basically, if your ducks are in a row, to use ducks again,
I like that analogy.
Should be treated,
yes,
just like anybody else.
So when we talk about having a duck in a row, that means they have to make sure that they understand the process and that their credit is an acceptable credit. They have the income, they have the employment, they have the reserve, and they can meet all the banking requirements. That way you can be able to determine whether you've been discriminated against.
Yeah, first of all, again, you need to know the rules of the game. If you're playing baseball, you hit the ball and you don't know the rules of the game. What do? Run to third base? Run to first base?
Skip first and second?
Right? Yeah, or some idiot just threw something at me. I've got a stick. I'm going to go hit him on the head. If you don't know the rules of the game, you're not going to be able to play the game. So that you need to, again, this is like this series is a way of learning, taking workshops, whatever it is, know what needs to be, know how to get your credit score in good shape. Understand that when you buy a house, you're making a huge commitment, and make sure that you can really afford it, that you've got the credit score to do it, and so forth. Then once you know that, know what the fair housing laws are so that you recognize when you are suffering, when you're not being treated fairly, because you understand how the game's played. You just hit the ball and it went up in the stands, and the referee says, no, you can't run around and go back to home base. I'm only going to count it as a first base hit for you. That's discriminatory.
So in other words, if you want to prevent the service provider from saying, well, I did my job.
Yes.
So they can claim that they denied the loan because your credit wasn't good, when in fact the gut feeling tell you that you were discriminated.
Yep.
But you don't have nothing to stand on. There's no base for you to stand on. And say, well, I have good credit, so I can back up my claim.
Yes.
That they discriminate. But if your credit is not good, or maybe I have the income. So if you don't have all your affairs in order, it's going to be very difficult to prove and to prevent discrimination.
Yeah. It really is something where you just have to understand what you're doing going into this. This is a big thing you're taking on. And by the way, sometimes you and I have talked about this, especially much more so 10 years ago, there were people who were going around trying to, go to people of color, people whose primary language wasn't English, and essentially saying, hey, you're not going to have any luck at all with the regular lenders, but I've got this wonderful thing I'll sell you. It's going to be 2 points higher. You're going to be paying more money every month. And there's going to be a balloon payment in 5 years where you're going to have to essentially refinance.
And there's an early payoff penalty.
There's an early payoff penalty and all these other things. But don't even try to go somewhere else. That's not, if you know what you're doing and you know your rights. Basically, discrimination, there's three things to make discrimination. There's an action. Somebody's done something. It has a bad effect on you. You were turned down. You applied for a mortgage. You were turned down for a mortgage.
You denied, yeah.
And the third one is it has to be connected to the fact that you're a protected category. Everyone is a protected category. So, but it just has to be connected to that.
Can you repeat the protective categories again, for example?
I mean, there are a number of them, but the key ones are race, religion, color, creed, sex, national origin, age, ancestry, whether you're married or not, what your sex is, your sexual preference, your gender identity and expression. Are there children in the household? Because sometimes people don't want to sell or don't want to rent to families with children. And again, veteran status, military status can be something too. There are all of these things are protected categories. Everybody's multiples of them. Just because you are doesn't mean you automatically, if someone turns you down, it's automatically discrimination, but it has to be because of that. That's hard to show, but that's why you really want to know what you're doing walking in there and be willing to challenge it if you have to.
So when you stated about the protected category is what affects me, because
yes,
they may discriminate against me not because I am an Afro-Latino.
Yeah.
They may discriminate me because of my sexual orientation, maybe because I'm married, maybe because I'm handicapped, or they may discriminate against me because I have kids, or what other reason would it be?
Any and all of those. And by the way, let me talk a little bit about handicap, because normally people think of it more in terms of accessibility. Can I get my wheelchair into someplace? And first of all, any public place, restaurants, theaters, the loan office, the bank, the mortgage office, things like that, need to be handicapped accessible so that I can get in. But it's more than that also. It might be, for example, and this is where we're talking about somebody's credit history or how long they've been working. Maybe if they look back 5 years, because of somebody was injured, they have a disability of some sort, during a certain period of that time, they may not have been able to work
to sustain employment. Sustain employment.
And so that's, at that point, it might be legitimate to ask that a reasonable accommodation, that's a term, a reasonable accommodation be made. I have this disability such that for a period of 6 months, 3 years ago, I was unable to work. That's no longer the case. But please do not hold that against me as a reasonable accommodation to my disability. So that can occasionally enter into these kind of decisions.
Well, this is this fear lending, this discrimination issue is actually is hard.
It's hard, and it's sometimes subtle.
Because I'm thinking that at some point, if I was to be in a position where I will be discriminated against, I'm going to feel like it's like a powerless sensation, a feeling of powerless. You can't do nothing about it, because if you do something about it, you could find yourself in the court system.
Yeah.
And the price could be high, because the person going to say, or the person could counter and say, they can deny it by saying, I was doing my job. Mm-hmm. He doesn't qualify.
Yeah. And they'll find some reason.
And they'll find a reason, because I gave him that reason. I gave that person that reason because I went and I applied for a loan without doing the proper research, without having all my ducks in a row.
Yeah.
Without actually going to one of a first-time homebuyer's educational class and ask a proper question, know what my rights are, looking at the credit. So I just decided I'm going to go apply for a loan. I went and applied for the loan. They discriminated against me. I felt literally like crap, because...
Yeah. And very often people just accept it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Almost.
I just forget about it. I never go back there again.
Look, I've been discriminated against all my life.
And this is nothing new.
It's nothing new. So why make a deal out of it? The reason to make a deal out of it is, first of all, you want to get what you came there because you wanted to do something. You should be able to get it. You should get that loan. You should be able to get that mortgage. But above and beyond that, it's also that you're doing it for your kids. You're doing it for other people. The next person that comes in there, if someone gets away with something, they're going to keep getting away with it.
They're going to think that it's okay because no one's going to do nothing, and they're going to keep on doing it. It's going to get worse.
Yeah. And again, if they have, I realize sometimes it's subtle. We're back to the duck again. But it's sometimes, maybe it's just a chicken, maybe it's not a duck. But the point is, when you get if you get to that, I'm not there every day, but if you call my office, I'd be glad. I'm not an attorney. I can't give you official legal advice, but I'd be glad to talk to you and try and figure out what's happening. I can give my phone number.
Of course you can.
Sure, 413-233-1609. I work at Wayfinders 3 days a week. I'm not always easy to get a hold of, but I do return my phone calls. I'll get back to you. There is the Massachusetts Fair Housing Center here in Holyoke, which they're listed, they're easy to get to. They can sometimes even potentially represent you. If you really feel that you have been discriminated against, you have a case for that discrimination, you can bring action through the courts, but also through the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, MCAD, Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. They have an office in Springfield.
They're right off of Dwight Street between Lyman Street and Taylor Street in Springfield.
Yep, right around from Amtrak.
Amtrak station.
Yep. And again, they will work with you. The federal laws, in some cases, even the Department of Housing and Urban Development does intervene in these things sometimes. So that, and again, you can get some interesting stuff. Let's say, religion, normally you don't think of that a lot in terms of applying for a mortgage, fair lending, but it can be. If you were one of the mainstream religions, maybe not. But again, there are any number of religions which there is pretty open prejudice against.
And they can identify by the clothing that they wear.
By the clothing you wear, yes.
And so,
yes.
It just came to me, I just thought about, if you have all your affairs in order in regards to, of course, we mentioned, I repeat it again, your credit, the employment, you have money saved to cover the reserve, and you have a good income, and you notice that there are giving you less than favorable loan products.
Mm-hmm.
You qualify for good loan product,
Yes.
and they give you unfavorable loan products. The appraisal report doesn't actually match the comparables. They're comparing different type of properties to minimize the value or to increase the value. That way you don't qualify.
Yeah.
And they providing you with inferior service. They're treating you less than what they're supposed to do. Those are indication that there's indication that something is not right when it comes to the loan process and discrimination.
Yes.
So I think we covered pretty much enough in this first episode of Fair Lending.
Yeah. Again, I think people just have to understand that it isn't magic. You're not supposed to get fair housing, fair lending doesn't mean you're supposed to get an automatic pass. You still have to do everything right, all the stuff you'd normally do. Understand this, and sometimes the best decision there may be, as much as I'd like to buy the house now, I'm going to buy the house in a year. And this is going to be, I'm going to embark on a plan where I'm going to get my credit score in good shape. I'm going to make sure everything's all lined up so that when I go in, I know I'm ready and right for it.
Have all your ducks in a row.
All my ducks are in a row. And then I'm going to know my fair housing rights. And if it feels that I'm not being treated fairly, everybody should be treated the same.
Yes.
Everybody gets a fair shot at it. Then be willing, if you want to, check on it. Ask, talk to somebody in the business who can tell you whether you are or are not being discriminated against.
Or they can call you.
They can call me. They can call Mass Fair Housing Center. They can call Mass Commission Against Discrimination. But if this feels like it's happening, it may well be, and be willing to be able to carry it forward, because you should be treated just like anyone else.
Well, John, I want to thank you very much. This has been excellent. It looked like we had a double dose today.
It was always a pleasure,
Yes. So, podcasters, I want to thank you for listening to this episode 1 for Fair Lending and Fair Housing. I'm here with Mr. John Fisher. My name is David Faley from Buy Me Casa. Thank you very much. Until the next episode.